I'm about to get into the message about how do we navigate the darkness. Now, if you haven't been here, we've kind of hit some things. So in the first half of this series, we talked about some things that you might expect to hear in church, like reading the Bible is going to help you because God says his word's a lamp to our feet and a light to our path. But one of the things that we learned that first week was not just that we need to read the Bible, but we need to obey what Scripture says, because ultimately what that whole passage is about, and if you kind of grew up around church, you heard the word is a lamp to my feet and a light to my path. You might have even sang that in a song that I'm not going to sing right now, but you might have sang that a little bit. But the reality is it's not just reading the Bible that makes it so influential. It's applying it and obeying it that actually begins to light our paths. And then the second week we learned how to pray, and not just idea of like, oh, dear God, help me, but this reality that like we can pray some R-rated prayers. We're living R-rated lives. Let's pray that way too, and let's bring our full self to God authentically, and let's pray some heavy stuff. And we looked at Psalm 13, and I love this, and I'd really encourage you to go back and take a look at Psalm 13 if you're struggling with prayer, or maybe you're not sure where to read in the Bible, because it's called a lament psalm, where David is just crying out to God, and he starts it this way. He says, how much longer? Is it going to be forever, God, that you abandon me and that you forget me? How much longer? And I read that and I'm like, yep, I feel that way. And David just pours all that out, and you're like, that doesn't really sound like worship, but the Psalms were written to help us learn how to worship. So there's something David's teaching us, that this idea that like when we pray and when we worship, we can bring our authentic self, frustrated and tired and exhausted and sometimes joyful, and we can bring all that to God, and he's actually big enough to handle it. And then in week 3, we learned just like the need for community, and that like we need to lean into community. In week 4, we took some time learning how to like assess ourselves and where are we at when it comes to loving the Lord our God with our heart, our soul, our mind, and our strength. And so how are we doing that? And you can go back and listen to all those on the podcast. And then last week, we picked it back up and we talked about this idea that we need some wise counsel. And we talked about wise counsel in a little bit different way than I think I've ever taught about wise counsel before. And it was this idea that like, here's 5 marks of wise counsel. And we learned some real things that help us distinguish the difference between community and wise counsel and bad counsel, because we don't want to be in a place where we're just listening to bad advice and chasing after it. But this morning, I want to get into something a little bit different. So we're in this series. We're still continuing it. It's going to go right along with it. But I want to just ask you this. When was the last time you did something really stupid because you were frustrated? And what was it? And you don't need to like shout it out because it's embarrassing for most of us. I'm not going to shout mine out. But when was the last time you got frustrated with something in life? You were aggravated, you were stressed, whatever it was. What did you compromise? What did you give up first? For me, it tends to be food. I run straight to Chick-fil-A. Well, I don't run there. I drive there. Let's not pretend. I'm not exercising while I'm stressed out. That might actually be helpful. I'm getting a cookie, a large Coke, probably a spicy chicken sandwich with bacon and pepper jack cheese on it, because that's just great. I might get 2 of those sandwiches. It doesn't matter. I'm running to something that's not healthy. I literally have stopped at Burger King twice in the past month. I hate Burger King with a passion because nobody likes Burger King. Let's just be real. But I've gone to Burger King twice in need of a Coke, and I wasn't in need of anything. I just really was like, I'm stressed, and I just want caffeine and pure sugar to taste exactly like I want it to. I just stopped buying Oreos because when I used to get stressed, I would go eat a pack of Oreos, not like a little 6-pack, like a 42-pack. That's the way they make them. It's a 42-pack. In any case, what's the last thing you compromised because you were stressed? See, I think our tendency when we find ourselves stressed and we find ourselves frustrated is to begin to just make these tiny little shifts. And they're not like massive, they're not game-changing, but I believe over time they begin to change our course and our trajectory of where we're headed. And if we're not careful, one little incremental change because we're stressed right now will lead us places we never wanted to go later. You know, it's like if I'm aiming at something, one of the things I enjoy is like shooting. So if you go shooting like a bow and arrow or a gun or whatever, if you're at a short distance, if I'm at 10 yards, it's not that big of a deal if I'm incrementally off by, say, 2 degrees. Because 2 degrees at 10 yards means I just missed the center of the target, but I'm still well on the paper. I'm probably, if it's like 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, I'm probably still in like the 8 or the 7. I'm still pretty close to where I'm aiming if I'm a little bit off. But if you give me a long rifle and tell me I'm going to shoot 200 yards, but I'm 2 degrees off, I'm going to be off the paper. I could be hitting somebody instead of where I'm aiming. It's massively different because over time, incremental changes just lead us further and further from where we actually want to go. And at least for me, that's been the biggest moments in life where I've turned around and I look and I kind of find myself in a place where I never intended to go and I said I would never be. And then I turn around and go, how in the world did I get here? And in moments of self-discovery, I've kind of tried to trace my steps back. And what I find is that it was that extra trip to Chick-fil-A. It was not telling my wife about it. It was spending in cash so that I didn't have to talk about what was going on. And like, it became this little compromise of integrity. It became, well, I'm just going to look at this thing on YouTube that I know is going to lead to temptation, but I'm not going to actually look at porn, that led to sex before marriage, that led to this regret. And it's kind of this constant thing where it's like, well, no, I didn't intend to get there, but I just kind of found myself there because I started making incremental little compromises out of moments of stress. And so how do we guard ourselves from that? How do we protect ourselves from that? Fortunately, Jesus talks about it. And Jesus is having a conversation. And I need to give you a little bit of backstory. So we're going to look at Luke 11. If you have a Bible and you want to open it up, feel free to open it up. It'll also be up here on the screen. But Luke 11:33 is where we're going to start. But kind of what's been happening in Luke chapter 8, chapter 9, chapter 10, you can go back and read these. And even the beginning of Luke 11, Jesus is teaching. And there's this group of people that have been coming at him. And there are a group of people called the Pharisees. They're the religious leaders. They believed in their religion more than anything else. They weren't a big fan of Jesus because he was taking away some of their followers. And so they're real adamant to shut him down. And so they've been coming to him. They've been coming to some of his people. They're kind of always standing in the background. You know, like that moment, I don't know if you ever dealt with this. I was a class clown, so I dealt with this often. That moment when like the principal just walked into your classroom and just stood in the back and I'm like, I know he's here for me. Like, he's not saying that, and I'm trying to make eye contact with him, and he doesn't want to make eye contact with me because he knows that he's about to rip me out of this classroom. I don't know if you've ever been there. I've been there often, but it's like that moment where the guy's just standing in the back, and you're like, that's not good that he's back there. That's kind of how the Pharisees were with Jesus. That Jesus would be teaching, and they would just be standing in the back with their arms crossed, just watching. Every now and then, maybe taking a note because they want to report something to somebody about something that he said. That was kind of their attitude. Every now and then they pull apart like one of his followers and they go, why does your teacher do what he does? Why doesn't he wash his hands before he eats? Doesn't he know that's like germy and gross? But also doesn't he know that that's like not even religious? Like he's supposed to do that. How religious is your teacher? Why are you following the guy that doesn't even remember to wash his hands? And so Jesus constantly is trying to like defend his people and do some things. But you're going to see in this story, Jesus just goes after some people. Like, he doesn't wait for them to say something. He doesn't wait for an accusation from them anymore. Jesus is kind of flipping the script and is like, I'm tired of you attacking my people. I'm tired of you putting unbearable burdens on my people. I'm tired of you making religion and connecting to God some game to be played instead of some relationship to be had. And we're going to change that. We're going to work on that. And if I offend you, I'm happy with it. And so you're going to see that in here, but Jesus starts it this way. He says, nobody lights a lamp and then hides it or puts it under a basket. Instead, a lamp is placed on a stand where it's a light that can be seen by all who enter the house. This makes sense. If you don't have lights, you don't light a candle and then put something over top of it to protect that candle flame. You want to be able to see. Your eye is a lamp that provides light to your body. When your eye is good, your whole body's filled with light. But when your eye is bad, your body's filled with darkness. And then he says this, make sure that the light you think you have is not actually darkness. If I could give you one warning from Jesus, if you miss everything else that I say this morning, I want to encourage you to assess if the things you're running to and the things you're hoping will bring light into your life are actually doing it or if they're just adding to the darkness. And yes, it may be a temporary flicker, but it actually, and over time, will just make life far more dark and more painful. Make sure that the light you think you have is not actually darkness. And he keeps going. If you're filled with light, with no dark corners, then your whole life will be radiant, as though a floodlight were filling you with light. And as Jesus was speaking, one of the Pharisees invited him to his home for a meal. So here we go. They're about to eat together. So he went in, took his place at the table. His host was amazed to see that he sat down to eat without first performing the hand washing ceremony required by Jewish custom. Jesus is breaking some religious principle. And then Jesus says to the guy, you Pharisees are so careful to clean the outside of the cup. I'll let you get it up there. Go ahead. Then the Lord said to him, you Pharisees are so careful to clean the outside of the cup and the dish, but inside you're filthy, full of greed and wickedness. Fools. Nice polite term. Didn't God make the inside as well as the outside? So clean the inside by giving gifts to the poor, and you'll be clean all over. What sorrow awaits you, Pharisees, for you're careful to tithe from even the tiniest income in your herb gardens, but you ignore justice and the love of God. So I want to just stop for a second. There's a moment when I went to West Africa. I don't suggest going to West Africa. That's where like diseases and stuff like that. But I was there to like meet some people, hang out. It was kind of a mission trip thing. I wanted to experience it. And I was with this organization called Mercy Ships. It was actually a really cool thing. They do surgery and all kinds of medical treatment for people that can't afford it and could never get it. And they save tons of lives. And I got to work with them for like 2 weeks and just hang out, be a part of the ship. But we were in Guinea. I was specifically in Conakry, and we spent a lot of time just walking around. If you don't know this, I'm not a medical professional, and so there's not a whole lot of surgery I could do. I tried to talk my way into it. They weren't really up for that. And so I was just like, well, I'm just going to spend time in the city. I'm going to walk around. I'm going to try and find out things. Unfortunately, I don't speak any of the languages that they speak in Conakry. And so they gave me a translator named Ansimon. And Ansimon and I got to spend some time together and just hang out. And he was in his young 20s. And at that time, I was kind of right around the same age. And we just like walked through the streets. We spent time together. He spoke English and he spoke Fula, but then he also spoke like French, which was their national language, and a bunch of the other tribal languages. And so when we went through like the markets, Ansimon could just talk and just have conversation and just do whatever. And I could talk through them. And that's a big deal for me because if you don't know this about me, I do love to talk. And so when I can't connect with people, it really gets frustrating that I can't speak at all what they're speaking. And so we were just walking through a market one day, and it was about breakfast time. And I said, Ansimon, can we go get breakfast? And he goes, yeah, there's a nice hotel down the street where a lot of Americans stay. And I said, no, I don't want to go there. And he goes, but their breakfast is good. I said, I know, but I don't want American breakfast. I can eat pancakes at home. I said, I want like a traditional Conakry, Guinea breakfast. Don't take me someplace you think I want to go. Take me someplace you would go. Like just in this market or wherever it might be. And he's like, are you sure? And I was like, yes, that's what I want. I want traditional Guinea marketplace breakfast. And he's like, all right, I got it. And so we start walking through this market, and it's dark because they don't have any lights. And it's daytime, but everything's kind of undercover. And we're walking by, and we walk past a meat stand where there's no refrigeration, and somebody's standing there with like a horsetail on a stick, like swatting away flies, like from the meat to like keep the meat clean. And I'm like, that's good. I'm glad we didn't stop at that stand. And then we kind of like walk past another stand and another stand and another stand. And when we're like ducking through alleys in this market, I'm in places I had no idea even existed. And everybody's like, there's a white dude in our home. This is strange. And so like we're walking through places that I literally think were people's residences at times. And we finally get to this little shack, this little hut in the side of the market, and it's got 3 stools out in front of it, 3 bar stools, and a little bit of a bar, and then kind of a griddle, and 2 buckets, 2 like 5-gallon buckets. And I was like, is this where we're going? He's like, oh yeah, this is one of my favorite breakfast places. And I was like, great. You just order me whatever. I said, just no mayonnaise. And he goes, okay, sounds good. I don't think there could have been more Miracle Whip on the sandwich that I got. And I'm like, I don't know where the breakdown was, but he didn't understand what I was asking her. That guy didn't care. Either way, this thing is loaded with Miracle Whip. But the guy makes this little bit of sandwich. It was like some Spam, a couple-day-old roll, some Miracle Whip, a couple other things, some tomatoes, whatever. I sat there. It was good. It was fine. I didn't get sick. But he said, hey, do you want some coffee? And I said, yeah, coffee sounds good. I'm not really a coffee drinker, but anything to drink sounds good at this point because it's going to wash this thing down, right? The guy says, great. And I'm not kidding. He has 2 buckets, a soapy bucket and a non-soapy bucket, I guess. And he takes a coffee cup that somebody else had been using. He dips it in the soapy bucket, kind of shakes it out. He dips it in the halfway soapy bucket that's been used to rinse a bunch of other people's stuff, takes it out, dries it off with the towel that's on his hip that I don't know where that thing's been, and then pours some like instant coffee and some hot water in it. And I'm like, I don't trust anything coming out of this cup. Because that water's just been sitting there for I don't know how long. This water has been just sitting here for I don't know how long. And that towel on your hip is disgusting. And it's what wiped out the inside and the outside of my cup. Nobody wants to drink out of a dirty cup. Now, the coffee was fine. Drank it. Didn't get sick. There's certain things you got to do in a different culture just because you don't want to offend people. That's kind of where I was at in most of that situation. But the reality is what Jesus is saying to the Pharisees is, you guys are so careful. You make the outside of the cup look pristine. The problem is the inside of it was done with some nasty, filthy, soapy water. And nobody wants to be exposed to any of that. He's like, you live your lives in such a way that looks good on the outside, but is just disgusting on the inside. You fools. What sorrow awaits you, Pharisees? And I'm like, I get it. That makes sense. God, help us not to live our lives in a way where we just worry about how we look on the outside, where we're just worried about what we post on Facebook, where we're just stressed about what we see and what others see, but who we actually are, like that we would be people of integrity, not just people who dress well. I talked to somebody yesterday who was giving up Facebook. They said, Facebook has just been such a time consumer for me, and I need to step away from it. And so they're a little bit older, and they were confused about how to do some things. And they said, if I log out, can people still contact me? And I said, yes, but you won't see it. And they're like, well, that's a problem, because I don't want to be rude to people. And I'm like, stop worrying about what people might think and start doing what's best for you. If you say, I need to step back from social media because it's too much of a distraction from the things in life that actually matter, then just step back from social media, and if it pisses off some people, let them be pissed. And they're like, but I don't want to be rude. Stop worrying about that. That's like worrying about the outside of the cup while just letting the inside of the cup rot. Eventually, that's not going to work out. But let us be people who worry more about what's on the inside than what's on the outside. And then he goes on, you're careful to tithe from even the tiniest income. Go back one. You're careful to tithe from even the tiniest income in your herb gardens, but you ignore justice and the love of God. Then the Lord... you should tithe, yes. In other words, yeah, you need to give a tenth, but don't neglect the more important things. What sorrow awaits you, Pharisees? You sit in the seats of honor in the synagogues, and you receive respectful greetings as you walk in the marketplaces. What sorrow awaits you? You're like hidden graves in a field. People walk all over them without knowing the corruption that they are stepping on. And one of the Pharisees and religious leaders stops him, and he goes, Teacher, you've insulted us in what you just said. And Jesus just goes, yep. No apology. Not, well, let me make it a little bit softer. Maybe you should wipe out the inside of the glass every now and then. Maybe you actually do care about justice. No, he doesn't apologize at all. He goes, yep. What sorrow awaits you, experts in the religious law? See, you crush people with unbearable religious demands, and you never lift a finger to ease the burden. What sorrow awaits you, for you build monuments to the prophets that your own ancestors killed long ago. In other words, you've formulated this religion that sounds nice and sounds good, but is impossible to live up to. Unless you were to dedicate every moment of your life to following all these rules, nobody can do it. And you just press the burden down harder. Because somehow you feel by crushing others, it just elevates you. He's like, what sorrow awaits you? And then he says, after this thing about the prophets, he says, in fact, you stand as witnesses who agree with what your ancestors did. They killed the prophets, and you join in their crime by building these monuments. This is why God said in his wisdom that he's going to send prophets and apostles to them, but they're going to kill some and persecute the others. And as a result, this generation is going to be held responsible for the murder of all God's prophets from the creation of the world. So from the murder of Abel to the murder of Zechariah, yeah, it's going to be certainly charged against this generation. What sorrow awaits you, experts in religious law, because you remove the key to knowledge from the people. You don't enter the kingdom yourselves, and you prevent others from entering too. And as Jesus was leaving, the teachers of the religious law and the Pharisees became hostile. That makes sense. I'm tracking with that. If you come into my house and you eat a meal and you insult everything that I've been standing on for the past 34 years of my life, I'm going to be offended. So they become hostile They tried to provoke him with many questions. They want to trap him into saying something they could use against him because apparently all the stuff he had said wasn't actually persecutable. I don't know what the right word would be there. But they can't convict him of anything because he's just being honest. But I want to go back to one of the first verses that we talked about. Make sure that the light that you're pursuing is actually light and not darkness. Make sure that it's authentic. And here's what I want to talk to you about in the next few minutes. Boundaries. How do we have boundaries? The tool of the week this week is boundaries. And it's not just boundaries when it comes to like making sure we don't make really bad decisions. It's not boundaries with like how do we stay pure in relationships, although that is something we're going to address. It's not just those things. It's boundaries, because what happens is when we get frustrated and we get stressed out and we get worked up, that we begin to make small incremental compromises. So how do we make sure that our boundaries are even stronger in moments where we're stressed, so that we don't compromise something and make everything far worse? Barbara Brown Taylor says it's the inability to bear dark emotions that causes many of our most significant problems. In other words, it's not the emotions themselves. When we cannot tolerate the dark, we try all kinds of artificial lights, including but not limited to drugs, alcohol, shopping, shallow sex, and hours in front of a television set or computer. There are no dark emotions. In other words, the anger that you feel, the pain that you feel, the frustration that you feel, the letdown that you feel, all of those things aren't bad in and of themselves. They're just emotions that we have. There are no dark emotions. There's just unskillful ways of coping with emotions that we cannot bear. I've been reading some of this book, Learning to Walk in the Dark. It's really been challenging because it forces you to learn to walk in really, really dark places. Because what I want to do in the dark is just give up. See, when I went through a separation and divorce, what I did was I just compromised things. I stopped paying some bills because that was easier. I was eating out because I didn't want to be home. I hated being in an empty house. Hated with a passion being in an empty house. And so the boundaries that I compromised were three things. I compromised my spending. I just ate out every single meal, all the time, anything I wanted to do. Like I just compromised spending, and we'll get to that in a minute. I literally at one point did my budget. I was spending $900 a month as a single guy on food. That was $10 a meal at every single meal because I was eating out 3 to 4 times a day, including fourth meal with Taco Bell. I compromised my spending, and it screwed me over, and it left me in debt for years to dig out of. I compromised my work schedule. I just went out and I did whatever I wanted. I worked all the time, and I worked none of the time, if that makes any sense. I was hanging out with people 70, 80, 90 hours a week because it was just a way to get out of the house. And then at the same time, I wasn't ever actually sitting down in my office doing the hard work that needed to be done because that was uncomfortable and I didn't feel like doing that. And then I just compromised my relationships. The friendships that I had, the mentoring relationships that I had became relationships where I depended on people. Relationships that shifted from I'm here for you to I need you to be here for me. It led to people getting hurt. It led to me being hurt. It led to far more dark places than light places. But in the moment, it was a little flicker of hope. It was a little bit of temporary light that I thought was making everything better, that I thought was going to sustain me to get to the next week and to the next month and to the next year. And the reality is it crushed me for the next week and the next month and the next year because I had to pay for those things. And I regretted those things. And I carried the weight of those things. Because if you haven't realized this yet, just swiping your credit card doesn't actually make anything better. It just leaves you bills to pay when you're feeling better. So here's 4 areas I want you to have boundaries when you're navigating the darkness. The first one is spending. How are you spending your money? Where are you spending your money? I would encourage you to build into your budget a line item. If you're an impulsive spender, build in a line item for impulsive spending. But it should be small. It should not be great, and it shouldn't be on a credit card. Build it into your budget so that you're not going into debt, making bad decisions financially. But give yourself some room to say, when I'm stressed out this week, when I'm frustrated this week, when I know everything's about to fall apart, when it's all hitting the fan, and I just want Cinnabon, I can afford it. $4.23, by the way. Cinnabon. I think it's like $6.57 if you add a large Coke to it. Problem. I've done it too often. But the reality is, how do we guard our spending? Because if you're not careful, here's what will happen. It becomes a Cinnabon a day, or a Cinnabon a week, and some Chick-fil-A, and some this, and some that, and then some new shoes, and then a new shirt, and then going out to the bar with some friends. And what you find is now you're spending $900 a month on food, a whole bunch of money on clothes, and you don't have money for the mortgage. And in that moment, what you've actually done in pursuing some artificial light is just extend your own darkness. Remember, learning to navigate the darkness is about ultimately trying to get out of that darkness. It's not about just being satisfied with it. And so we don't want to do things that are going to extend the darkness. So be careful. Put some added boundaries around your spending. Secondly, you need some areas of boundaries around your sex life. For single people, this means get off Tinder, get off Bumble, get off Grindr, get off whatever app you're on that's leading to one more hookup. I don't know what it is, and I don't know what you're pursuing, but you got to guard that. It also means some of us may need to go from a smartphone to a dumb phone for a period of time because our phone's just leading us to look at more porn. Guard your sex life. Guard your sexuality. You need to have a stronger boundary in moments of frustration because you're more likely to compromise. Don't run into some relationship full blast and just hope that it works out because you're frustrated and it feels good for a moment to be around some good people. Or at least around people who seem interested in your life. Married people, guard your sex life. Look, I'm real adamant about this. When you're going through struggles in your marriage, you should not be talking one-on-one with the opposite sex. Just avoid that at all costs. Do whatever it takes. Kim and I have a policy that we don't meet with one-on-one with the opposite sex ever. Like, I will not go to a restaurant with you if you are of the opposite sex. Unless you are literally my family, we're not doing that. Because I want to guard my marriage. And you go, but how do you have meetings with certain people? Either Kim goes or they come to our house. Or I grab Francis or Tim or somebody and I just take them into a meeting with me. And people might be like, I didn't know that they were coming. I didn't either, but I'm not meeting with you one-on-one because I'm guarding my marriage. And my marriage is healthy. But we live in a world, in a society that says, no, men and women can hang out together and never catch feelings for one another. I just know that not to be true in my life, and I don't think it's really true in our society. And so I want to guard marriage more than I want to hang out with people. Because I was married to somebody who hung out with a friend when we were having some tension, and they wound up hooking up, and it wound up being the end of our marriage. And you go, Ryan, that's just your story. Well, don't make it yours. Guard your heart. Guard your sex life. Guys, ladies, porn exists in marriage too. Guard what you're watching. Guard what you're seeing. Guard how you're talking to people. But I want to specifically talk to married couples for a minute. This is a fun thing. This isn't heavy. Have plenty of sex if you're going through tough times. Like, sex is there for you. It's a natural stress reliever. Enjoy it. I have good friends of mine who have talked about it, and I talk about sex often with my friends, and we just have conversations, and one of them's like, man, my wife and I haven't had sex in 2 or 3 months, and I'm like, dude, no wonder you guys are having some tension. And he's like, well, the tension kind of led to the no sex, and I'm like, and now the no sex is leading to a lot more tension. And he's like, yeah, I just find other ways, which means he's going down some other roads because he hasn't put boundaries around that. The reality is, I would encourage you to have more sex in really dark moments if you're married with your spouse. Because one of the things that I've always compared sex to with premarital couples is sex is best left in the fireplace. Sex is the fire that can warm the whole house, but if you take it outside of the fireplace of marriage, it's like it has the potential to burn down everything. And while unmarried people, divorced people need to guard themselves to not take sex out of the fireplace of marriage, married people, warm up your house. If it is cold, lean into that. Literally. Do what you need to do. Be with your spouse. Enjoy that time. Guard the boundary of your sex life. Third, have a boundary around your surroundings. Who are you surrounded by? What environments are you in? Jim Gaffigan, I got stuck in a Jim Gaffigan loop the other day of, comedic stuff, and he was talking about bars. And he said, why do we go to bars and get surprised at 2 a.m. that people are drunk? That's literally what they're there for. He said it's like at 1:45 we start looking around and go, look how drunk that guy is. He's like, yes, we are all in a bar. And it's 1:45 in the morning. Like just kind of like an obvious thing to point out. But when you're stressed and you find yourself in a dark place, putting yourself in a surrounding of a bunch of drunk people at 1:45 in the morning is just not going to be healthy. And we know that sitting here on Sunday morning. Maybe because we did it last night. Maybe because we just know it. It's just logical. The reality is, stop scheduling that. Have a stricter boundary around your surroundings. Who are you around? Who are you spending time with? Are they people who are following Jesus, or are they people who are trying to get you to do another shot? I don't think there's any point to shots except to just get wasted. So if you're around the friend that's constantly trying to buy you another shot, you need to stop being around that friend in a really dark moment. Because here's the reality. It's easier to take the shot and forget for a little bit. But we always wake up with more regrets in the morning than we went to bed with. We have to guard our surroundings. Not only are they people who like us, are they people who love us, are they people who love Jesus? Who are we surrounding ourselves with? The community we're in matters. Paul would say, do not be misled. Bad company corrupts good morals. You cannot just hang out with people who have completely different values than you and expect yourself not to be affected. Doesn't work that way. So guard your spending, guard your sex life, guard your surroundings, and lastly, guard your spirituality. But I don't know where I'm at with God. I'm frustrated. I don't even know if he exists anymore. How could a good God let this happen? Don't stop reading your Bible. Don't stop praying heavy prayers. Don't stop journaling from time to time. Don't stop expressing those things. Because here's what I've learned over time. God doesn't work on my timeline, but that doesn't mean I should check out of my timeline of pursuing him. God doesn't work on my timeline or yours. You already know this because you're frustrated with something. And if God just worked on your timeline, it would have already worked out. But the reality that God doesn't work on your timeline doesn't mean you should not take the time to spend with God. I've done that. And one incremental change of saying, I'm just not going to do my quiet time this week or today, or I don't need to pray because I'm just too frustrated, leads to a week of not praying or a week of only praying twice, leads to something, leads to something, leads to something. And I find myself feeling like I'm light years away from the God that I used to be so close to. Don't compromise your spirituality in a moment of darkness. I know that you're frustrated, and I know that that frustration may be with God, but you need to be more guarded and more adamant about, I'm going to do the things that I know are going to make me healthy so I can love the Lord my God with my heart, my soul, my mind, and my strength, because at the end of the day, those things are going to lead me towards true light. As the band comes back up, I just want to share a quick story that I've heard over time, and I may not get every single detail right, but I just want to share it. So the U.S. Treasury Department spends a lot of time trying to get rid of counterfeit bills. It makes sense. They make real money. They want to make sure that fake money is not out there and that people aren't getting deceived by it and things like that. But what I found fascinating is by how they know that fake bills are fake bills. And some of you may have heard this, but the way that they do it is not by studying all the counterfeits. That's what would make sense to me. If I need to know if something is true or not, I'm going to go study what's fake so that I can quickly distinguish all the fakes. I can learn all the tricks that they use, all the stuff that they do. But that's not how the U.S. Treasury Department does it at all. And they're spending millions to protect trillions, right? What they do is have their entire staff of people spend all of their time studying the real bill. Because if they want to know if 100's counterfeit, they need to know exactly what the real thing looks like. Every little extra marking, every little thing behind the picture, everything in the picture. They study it in detail, to perfection, with what is real, so that the moment something fake comes along, they go, that's just not right. And it doesn't matter if I can exactly put my finger on what it is. The reality is I just know that that's not right. I think for us, as we pursue Jesus and as we go through tough times, we need to be adamant about putting a boundary around our spirituality so we know the real thing. Because Jesus said, I came to give you life and life to the full. I came that you'd live freely and lightly. And you're like, my shoulders are heavy. Yes. Stop studying what's making them heavy and start studying what Jesus said to do. Because then when artificial light of spending comes along, or artificial light of sex comes along, or artificial light of some bad friends comes along, or artificial light of some feel-good spirituality comes along, you're able to go, no. I'm too aware of the real thing to know that that's not it. And maybe I can't put my finger on everything, maybe I can't figure out everything, but I just know that that is not real light. And at the end of the day, the biggest warning that Jesus gives us in this passage that we studied is to beware, be aware if the light that you're following, the light that you're chasing is real light or artificial. Because if it's the wrong thing, it's just going to fill you with more darkness. And at the end of the day, none of us want the darkness to continue. And here's the thing. Some of us have been sitting here for months. Some of us have been sitting here for years. Some of us have been sitting here for a little bit less than an hour. And we hear about stories about Jesus, and we can read something where he goes after some Pharisees, and we can look at our own lives and go, maybe I fit in with the Pharisees. I like my religion. I like my routine. I like that I just show up on time and I do what I'm supposed to, but I don't actually have a real relationship with God. Or maybe you're here and you're like, this is the first time I've ever done this, and I don't want to be the Pharisees. Let today be the day where you make a decision to say, I want to just chase after Jesus. He says he wants to be my Lord. He says he can lead me to the life to the fullest. I want to experience some of that. I want to know what that is. Check the box on your connection card that says, accepting Christ as my Savior, or getting baptized. Let's have a conversation about what that means so that you can take a next step and intentionally pursue Jesus. The second thing I want to encourage you to do is take communion with us. There's some people in just a minute, I'm going to pray as we get ready to close service, and there's some people in just a minute, they're going to walk forward, they're going to pass a communion tray down your row. You don't have to take it. It's totally optional. It's simply a reminder of the fact that Jesus stepped into our mess so that we have hope out of our mess. It's got a stack of 2 cups. One's a cracker, one's some juice. It represents the body and blood of Christ that was shed on the cross so that we could have hope out of the darkness. Jesus went into some really dark places, experienced the most pain of everything in his life, was completely abandoned by his Father so that you and I in 2019 could have hope and the chance at freedom. And we just take communion as a reminder that even though we may find ourselves in some dark places, even though we may be in some pain, even though we may have lost some people we love, the reality is our God is still good and he cares for us enough to die for us. And so I'd encourage you to take communion. But I'd encourage you to think about your spending and your sex life and your surroundings and your spirituality and ask the question, are my boundaries that I've set in place good, or have I abandoned them because I'm stressed? Fight to have good boundaries. At the end of the day, it'll lead you to light far quicker. Let's pray. God, I thank you for who you are. Lord, I hate boundaries. I want to kind of run to everything that feels good in the moment. But the reality is, every time I've ever done that in life, it's led me to more pain. And God, I pray that this morning's message would save some people from being where I've been, that they wouldn't have my story to share down the road. I wish somebody had this talk with me 10 years ago and I'd actually listened. So God, I pray that as we find ourselves in dark moments, as we find ourselves frustrated, as we find ourselves let down, maybe by you and with you, God, that we would continue to have healthy boundaries around where we put our money, what we do with our bodies, who we choose to spend our time with, and ultimately how we connect with you. Because God, at the end of the day, we don't want to be in this darkness any longer. So God, while we wait for you to turn the lights back on, I pray that you just help us to pursue you with healthy boundaries. It's in your name I pray. Amen. Guys are going to serve communion. The band's going to ask you to stand and sing in just a minute.